Good evening, everyone. On 9/11/2013, this year, it's a day both to reflect and to look ahead. Of course, we mourn the thousands who perished 12 years ago. We rebuild the families in the city, still and always adapting to the new normal that began that day. But it's also the day after an important election that turned out to be a call for change among New York City Democrats. As you doubtless know by now, Public Advocate Bill de Blasio, with his anti-Bloomberg Tale of Two Cities message, won more votes than any of his Democratic rivals. However, it's not clear yet whether he has won the 40% necessary to avoid a runoff against runner-up Bill Thompson. Paper ballots won't be counted until Monday. In third place was the early favorite in this race, City Council Speaker Christine Quinn. She polled only about 15% in the only poll that actually counts. And despite a vigorous campaign, City Comptroller John Liu received about 8%. To begin our analysis, let's take a few minutes to talk with John Liu, who, by the way, got more votes than the Republican nominee, Joe Lhota, in this Democratic city. John Liu, thanks for coming
Well,
in.
thanks for pointing that out.
And that's an indication of how democratic a city we are. Anthony Weiner came in behind you, also got more votes than Joe Lhota, because we're 6-1 Democratic registered.
This is a Democratic town, yes. And it's become more Democratic in the ratios.
How are you? How taxing is it to run for mayor, mentally, physically?
I have enjoyed it every step of the way. First and foremost, I do have to echo some of your comments. Today is a day that lives on in infamy in our city and our country's history. This morning when I was at the 9/11 memorial, you can clearly see the grief, the emotion, the pain is still on the faces of the families of the victims of 9/11, and our sorrow continues to go out to them, and we continue to reflect on what we can do more.
It will never go away in our lifetimes. Anyone like you and I who are here on that day. I'm curious what you learned as a campaigner for mayor, a candidate for mayor. Of course, you were already city controller, so you had a citywide elected office. You've campaigned citywide before. You've governed citywide. But what did you learn about the city that was new through this process?
Well, I had a great experience 4 years ago when I got elected city controller. The city is a vast, vast place. This city is larger than a lot of nations out there. And with our economic base, our tax base, and the number of people, it's a huge place. And in fact, you can almost say you travel all throughout the world just by going to from neighborhood to neighborhood, all throughout the city of New York. This time, I was even more enlightened, and really, I thoroughly enjoyed the campaign trail, going to every neighborhood almost on a daily basis, if not a weekly basis. It was a tough campaign, as you know. I had a lot of hurdles, obstacles thrown my way, none of them caused by my own campaign, always by others. But nonetheless, it was a thoroughly enjoyable. And you say taxing, I don't ever think it was taxing, because look, taxing is when people have millions of New Yorkers on a daily basis have jobs that are very taxing. And if they have no choice but to do those jobs, if they want to keep themselves and their families afloat. But as someone who's seeking office, higher office, myself in this case, I'm just gratified to have the opportunity to go through this.
Do you think that running as the most liberal candidate in the field, as I think you were, but Bill de Blasio getting the credit for that when he was also giving himself that tag, maybe even more explicitly than you were, I don't know. Do you wish you had a charming son with a cute afro?
Well, my son Joey is pretty charming himself. But he's younger. He's 12 years old, and I certainly did not want to involve him too much in this. Look, I've been very proud of my progressive record and also my progressive vision for the city of New York, and I've been very consistent on all my issues, unlike some of the people that you mentioned. But nonetheless, look, going forward, I think this is a progressive town, and after 12 years of this administration, people do want to change. They want to change in terms of our economic policy, in terms of how our schools are run, in terms of the affordable housing, or I dare say the lack thereof that has been built these past many years. And so we do need a change, and to some extent, Bill was able to articulate the change that we need, plus the fact that he had the millions of dollars that the Campaign Finance Board had given his campaign, which they really unfairly denied my campaign.
And of course, you did have the associates who were charged and I guess convicted of campaign finance related crimes, and so you got denied your matching funds. Did that matter to how you ran
Oh,
the
that
campaign?
absolutely mattered. Well, first and foremost, let's talk about the investigation. It was a years-long witch hunt where they found a couple of pawns, they set them up for failure. That's what happened, but they never should have gone after those people. They should have come straight after me if they really thought that there was something improper about my campaign, which there isn't. As far as the Campaign Finance Board, we followed all the rules, and our campaign was entitled to, and more importantly, my contributors were entitled to have their campaign donations leveraged. I'm proud that we had by far the lowest average. We had more immigrants contributing to my campaign. We had first-time donors. 90% of my donors are first-time donors to any political campaign. So it was unfair. It was an unfair witch hunt to begin with, and the Campaign Finance Board did the wrong decision. Nonetheless, listen, I didn't complain. We continued full steam ahead. Did it hurt us? Absolutely, because it denied me the ability to talk directly with the voters, to talk about the issues that I'm happy that you're bringing them up, the progressive values that I have held dearly.
Do you think that your campaign was a step forward for Asian New Yorkers, or do you even look at it through that lens?
I think that my campaign is a step forward for many people who have not been involved in the political process before. Asian Americans being just one of the groups. Asian Americans, whether they be Chinese Americans or Korean Americans, or the fast-growing numbers of Bangladeshi and Pakistani and Indian Americans here in New York City who form much of the growth. Asian Americans got out there in full force, participated, unfortunately not at a record level as I had hoped for. I think some of the near daily polls that were flawed to begin with that never measured the Asian American base, they got repeated so often that it became somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy where it just dampened the enthusiasm of many of my voters, and they stayed home. But it wasn't just about Asian American voters. We got many Latino voters involved for the first time, Mexican Americans. You and I talked about how Carlos Menchaca is the first Mexican American in the city council. We got a lot of Ecuadorians and Colombians involved. We got a lot of Russian Americans involved in this election.
And I will say, up in my neighborhood in northern Manhattan, there's an African immigrant-owned business with a John Lew sign in the window. Right nearby, a Dominican-owned business with a John Lew sign in the middle.
Oh,
so
excellent.
you were connecting with immigrants as a whole. Is that really who you were speaking for in a certain sense?
I think my message certainly resonated a lot with immigrants, in part because I'm an immigrant myself, but also look, most immigrants, which are about half the city, they have no connection whatsoever to city government or city hall except when they have to pay their taxes or when they get a ticket. That should not be. City government should be a government for all New Yorkers, and I strove to be a mayor for all people.
What's your advice to Bill Thompson tonight? If Bill de Blasio winds up with 39.99% of the vote after the paper ballots are counted, should Thompson push a runoff?
I think Bill is a very credible candidate, and Bill Thompson, that is, and he's a candidate. He has the right to exercise all the options that are provided to him under election law, and he has every right to demand a runoff election.
There have been times in the past where there have been very difficult, stressful, and fractious runoff elections among Democratic finalists, and then the ultimate winner went on to lose the general election. Is that a risk?
Look, you can never put things in those terms, because the election laws and the rules are the rules, and every candidate has the ability and the right to insist on following through on those rules. The rules right now call for a 40% threshold. If the threshold is not met, then Bill Thompson has every right to say that he wants to go forward, and he has the prerogative to say that, you know what, he doesn't want to do it anymore.
And what's next for John Lew?
People have been asking me that all day today. First of all, I really didn't want to get too much into the politics today, just because this is such an important day in our city's history. I've got to talk with my wife, Jenny. She and I make these decisions together. Lots of paths ahead, political and otherwise, and I'm going to do the best not only for my family, but also what's best for a community that I work in partnership with.
We recognize the blue ribbon on your jacket for 9/11.
Yes.
And we thank you for all the conversation during the campaign. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. I look forward to many more.
Perhaps most impressive about Bill de Blasio's vote getting, he beat all opponents in all the major demographic groups, among whites, blacks, Latinos, even beat Quinn among gay New Yorkers and women. We saw that Obama-style rainbow forming yesterday as we talked with voters exiting the polls in various locations around the city.
Who'd you vote for mayor?
Blasio.
And why?
Blasio, whatever his name.
Sure. And how come?
How come?
Yeah.
I think he has the best platform. He seems to be honest and decent and impressive. I think he's very impressive.
Yo voté por de Blasio.
De Blasio,
How come?
because I think he's taking on the question of whether we do or don't have an austerity budget, and because I think he will be better for education, even though I know Thompson is being touted for education.
De Blasio.
¿Por qué?
De Blasio. Because he helped to the school.
Spanish is okay. Say in Spanish.
For la gente pobre. For the poor people.
Who'd you vote for?
For the primary, I voted for de Blasio
How come?
because he's the most progressive, and I really don't like Christine Quinn. So it was really voting against Christine Quinn at this point.
So you voted already.
Yes, I did.
For mayor, who'd you pull the lever for?
I voted for, I'm just forgetting his name right now.
Bill de Blasio?
Bill de Blasio, thank you.
¿Qué le interesa como alcalde?
Oh, Bill de Blasio.
My candidate for mayor, I believe, must be Mr. de Blasio at this point. The others who I considered possibilities, including Mr. Liu, who my union endorsed, have fallen so far behind that I think voting for them, any of them would be.
Right. So in a way, you're affected by the polls.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
You don't want to vote for a loser and waste your
Well,
vote.
If there's a runoff, my phone will keep ringing. Is that good enough or not?
I see. This is robocall prevention.
Yes, that's right.
Thanks for your time.
Sure, thanks for stopping me.
Will that voter have to endure more robocalls in a mayoral runoff? Joining us, Maurice Carroll, director of the Quinnipiac Poll, and Greg David, columnist for Crain's New York Business and director of Business and Economics Reporting at CUNY's Graduate School of Journalism. Welcome.
Thank you. Hey, Brian, good to be here.
And Greg, you think Bill Thompson has to concede to de Blasio sooner rather than later, but before you tell us why, let's play this clip of Bill Thompson not sounding like he's going to do that as of last night.
Let me congratulate Bill de Blasio for running a good campaign. That's something he knows how to do. But every voice in New York City counts. And we're going to wait for every voice to be heard. We're going to wait for every voice to be counted. So, my friends, this is far from over. Far from over.
Greg David, far from over?
No, it's over. It's over because, first of all, he has to wait a whole week to know if he can run. Can't raise any money, can't get any endorsements.
Because the paper ballots that have yet to be counted can't be fully counted until at least Monday, correct?
That's what they tell us. And by law. Who's going to give him money in the interim? Secondly, his major support from the unions, especially the United Federation of Teachers, they're going to go all in on a high-risk strategy to defeat the most likely next mayor with whom they have to deal with a contract? No way.
Somebody told me that it was the teachers union that was egging him on to stay in and fight because they were his kingmaker. You don't think that's true?
I don't think that would be very unlike Michael Mulgrew's attitudes. Third, what's he going to run on? What is the theme? The theme they used for 2 weeks is de Blasio isn't qualified, has no record, it didn't have any traction. The only theme you can run on is that de Blasio's too far left for New York, that's not a good theme for Bill Thompson might be Joe Loda's theme.
So, Mickey, how do you explain that clip that we played from last night? I think we were all surprised that Thompson came out on fire the way he did.
I think, Brian, he did what he had to do. And now I think what he has to do is get out because he can't win. Why run if you can't win? And there's no question about it that de Blasio beat him in every possible category and is going to keep on. Look, his pitch is de Blasio doesn't know how to do the job. I, Bill Thompson, do know how to do the job. Well, it didn't work.
And I saw a report this afternoon that his own campaign chair, Meryl Tisch, who's the chancellor of the New York State Board of Regents, said it's time. I can't confirm this personally, but I saw that report that she said he should.
She said no one has the stomach for a fight. That is what her quote is in the New York Times.
And de Blasio may or may not have gotten just over 40%, but he beat Thompson by 14 points, unless the paper ballots were to break so drastically differently from everybody else.
They never do, Brian.
More than
never
that.
do. They never do. And the answer, I mean, it's worth talking about, I suppose, but I don't see any way in the world, and he's not a dumb guy, he can't win.
De Blasio split the black vote with him. They each got 42% of the black vote. Presumably that would happen in a runoff too. What's this base of voters that gets Bill Thompson to 50%? That's why it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, well, it just plain doesn't work. And anyway, de Blasio surprised everybody. Surprised me anyway. Remember the Quinnipiac poll 3 or 4 weeks before? He was 4th. Now all of a sudden he comes in and wins. There are a lot of theories about why he did it, including maybe it sounds silly, but that great commercial with his kid with that great afro
That's
haircut.
the leading theory about why he took such a leap, in combination with his inequality theme and the particular raised taxes on the 500 plus.
Brian, you know that I'm sorry, but the liberal candidate always wins the Democratic primary in New York.
Absolutely.
Always.
I think we shouldn't have been surprised. I got confused because I lost track of who the liberal candidate was. I thought it was Anthony Weiner for a while. 4 years ago, David Yaski gets defeated by John Liu in the Comptroller's race. De Blasio wins. Ferrer wins the mayoral runoff, the mayoral campaign in 2005 against more conservative candidates. That's the story of the last 20 years in New York.
Yeah, right.
Right. So this most liberal candidate, as he was portraying himself, likely the nominee, is going to have to run against somebody, not nobody. So let's see a clip of Republican nominee Joe Loda from his victory speech last night.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight represents a mile marker on our road to victory in November. Our journey continues, just at a faster pace. Now is the time for our party to come together and unite for the common good. There have been times in this campaign where petty attacks and distractions have dominated the conversation. My campaign has always been about the issues that matter to New Yorkers and how the mayor can best serve the people of this great city. And at the end of this day, this is what brought us to victory: issues, vision, principles, and experience. And I can proudly say that we conducted our campaign with integrity, honesty, and substance. Again, it is time to unify our party, strengthen it, and prepare it for victory in November.
Joe Loda last night. Greg, you've been an open enthusiast for Joe Loda during this primary campaign, I think it's fair to say. What did you think of that speech? How does he set himself up to run in what is still a 6-1 Democratic city, even though we haven't elected a Democratic mayor in 24 years?
Well, I don't know how much I want to scoop myself. This is my column for Monday, but I will say that one of the most important signposts came to me when a leading business and civic leader looked at me across the table and said, Loda hasn't inspired anyone. It's been a very weak campaign up to now. I don't personally know what his message is. He's raised very little money. You know, the papers made a whole big to-do about the Koch brothers, I think, giving him $300,000. I mean, that's like penty-ante money compared with what's needed.
The famous conservative Koch brothers.
Right. You know, he does not start out in a good position, and it's going to be incredibly difficult.
But Brian, if he unifies his party, they lose. They can't do it with the unified Republican Party.
Because there are so few.
There aren't enough Republicans.
But,
look,
But wait, let me ask a question.
Okay.
Is there not a chance that he wins based on the last, 5 elections in which Democrats, as you say, tended to nominate the most liberal candidate in the field, and that person arguably was deemed too liberal, and they wanted adult supervision if that term
I think
applies.
You're right.
And so Giuliani won twice and Bloomberg won 3 times.
Well, there are a lot of reasons why each of them win, but I think that you can't rule Lota out, because I think, Greg, that he'll get a lot of money. I think that the business establishment, the political establishment, they don't like de Blasio.
They say he's running on class warfare.
Well, whatever they say, they don't like him. They don't trust him. And so they will try to pour some money in for the other guy. And Lota is a solid candidate. There's no question about that. But if you looked last night at the speeches, a great word in the Times story, I've forgotten who wrote it. I think Davey Halbersting, said that de Blasio pivoted from his campaign to being a reassuring, here are my policies, but I'm not a real barn burner, where Joe Lota talked about how we got to unify the Republican Party, and it's just not going to work.
Let me go back to Thompson for our last 45 seconds. One, yes, de Blasio won most of the major groups. John Liu pointed out on his way out the door after we were off the air that de Blasio did not win among Asian Americans. He did, so that's one group to note. They do exist. But the post-Bush versus Gore era, does Thompson owe something, not to himself, but to his voters, to wait until next week to make sure every vote is counted?
I guess he can wait till then, but the powers to be in the Democratic Party want to get on here because they don't want de Blasio to lose. It's been 20 years since Democrats ran City Hall, and they want to run it again, and there will be enormous pressure for him to do something. So maybe it'll come Monday night or sometime like that, but people will know very soon that Thompson has decided.
Greg, I wonder if the powers that be in the Democratic Party really do want de Blasio to win. He is not popular with his fellow Democrats. So we'll have to see. Because he is a very liberal guy, and because he ran against them, he ran against everything that they have stood for. No, Lota is not you can't write him off, although I would not want to bet my paycheck.
There isn't a Democrat in New York who would prefer Joe Lota to Bill de Blasio.
A handicapped start for Joe Lota.
You're probably right.
Says Greg David and Mickey Carroll. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
To place a period on this conversation, let's take 2 minutes to hear Bill de Blasio speaking to his happy supporters last night about wanting to build a New York where no one is left behind.
Great.
And it's why we started this journey together nearly 8 months ago on a frigid January day. Remember that one? Just a short distance from here in front of our house in Brooklyn. That day we said that New York had become a tale of 2 cities. One where the very wealthy had not only rebounded from the Great Recession, but where life couldn't get much better for them. And we acknowledged that day that there was another New York, a New York where nearly half our citizens are living at or near the poverty line, where luxury condos had replaced community hospitals, where proactive policing had somehow slipped quietly into racial profiling, where too many mothers and fathers feared that their daughters and sons would never achieve the very thing we want most for our kids, that they get the education they need to pave the way for a better life. That day, we resolved to do something about this tale of 2 cities.
to put forth a plan to give every child of this city the opportunity to reach their God-given potential. Now, gathered that January day was a small but dedicated group of New Yorkers, bundled up, but big of heart. And that day we saw a ripple of determination to chart a new way forward, to offer an unapologetically progressive alternative to the Bloomberg era.
Public advocate and likely mayoral candidate, Bill de Blasio. While the mayoral primary took center stage, a majority of city council seats were also in play yesterday. So is the Brooklyn DA seat, Comptroller nominations. Joining us for an in-depth look at some of the other races, who won, who lost, and what those results mean, are veteran reporter Michael Aronson, member of the editorial board of the Daily News, and Kate Pastor, former editor-in-chief of the Riverdale Press. Pastor just can't stop covering the Bronx, currently freelancing for City Limits Bronx Bureau. She's also an adjunct at Hunter College. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let's start with the Brooklyn DA's race. It's not every day that a district attorney in one of the boroughs of New York gets turned out of office as an incumbent, right?
It's like never. I think it's 100 years or something like that.
1911 since it happened to a Brooklyn DA. I read 1955 since it happened anywhere in the city. Of course, Joe Hines has been in office for a long time. I don't think his bio ultimately will read he got defeated for re-election as opposed to he served for 24 years.
Well, he was defeated last night against a guy who had never run before, and this fellow Ken Thompson beat him by 10 points. It wasn't even close.
Why?
I think, well, we ended up writing a very scathing editorial saying dump Hines, but maybe time was up, and also his voters that he needed didn't show up. Maybe there were, Ken Thompson's a black fellow, maybe there was more black turnout in certain parts of Brooklyn. That may have been prompted by the de Blasio-Thompson struggle for the black vote in parts of the borough. And that voters were just, you know, tired with Hines. There have been scandals after scandals with his office, you know, this current term and going back. And it was just a remarkable achievement by this guy, Ken Thompson.
Another race, before we go to Kate, Vito Lopez lost his city council race. Are you surprised about this? The once extremely powerful Assembly Housing Committee chairman and Brooklyn Democratic Party leader. He had the sexual harassment scandal, but I know pundits, people like ourselves in the press who watch elections at the neighborhood level more closely than I do, who thought that the senior citizens in Ridgewood and Bushwick who got, you know, housing as a result of him.
Right, his name's on everything.
And that they would turn out and keep Vito Lopez in office, albeit a new office, city council, but it didn't work.
Well, he got a decent share of the vote against this other fellow, Reynoso. But maybe it was too much even for Vito Lopez, that there was so much piled on top of him. Remember, a year ago, he won re-election to the Assembly after all the stuff came out, because no one had even run against him. He had managed to knock people off the ballot. He had, you know, struggles. Still, his protege won his old Assembly seat, which was vacant because of his resignation. So his power base has been wounded, but it's not been destroyed because of the senior citizens empire that he set up.
We're going to put a graphic on the screen about turnout. Turnout was higher by about 2 times, double, in the Democratic primary yesterday compared to 2009. And this map from a CUNY political and demographic mapping project shows turnout in the 2009 mayoral general election. The darker the blue, the higher the turnout. Kate, the darkest blue is 30% or more turnout. How pathetic that we read 30% as high.
Right.
But to the area that you've been covering, the Bronx, oh my goodness.
Yeah, the Bronx generally in recent years has not come out to vote, and it's a big problem as far as obviously being represented on a citywide level and any number of levels. Even when there seem to be good reasons to come out to vote, Bronxites, too many Bronxites do stay home.
Why?
It's an interesting question, and there are a number of reasons. There are demographic reasons. You know, the Campaign Finance Board has looked at areas that have low voter turnout, and they have certain things in common: low educational attainment, high rates of poverty, high neighborhood turnover rates. Those are all things that definitely play a role, especially in the areas that have the lowest turnout in the Bronx. It's not all the same. And I think that's important to point out.
The city's poorest borough, one of the poorest counties in the nation.
Right.
Do you think it's hopelessness and a sense that no candidate is going to make a difference, so why bother? I've got too much day-to-day life to get through.
Listen, I heard hopelessness from, or that kind of sentiment from people who did go out to vote go out to vote yesterday. And it wasn't necessarily that so I guess it's not necessarily hopelessness. Here were people who were casting a vote, but sort of betting against it having a real impact. And a lot of people just weren't taking it very seriously in the sense that that it would make a real difference in their everyday lives.
Michael, I'm curious what you think about the impact of two groups that were trying to influence races all over the city yesterday. One is the Real Estate Board of New York, which represents developers and landlords. They ran a spending campaign, $6
or $7 million, right?
Yeah, a Citizens United special, independent of the candidates they were supporting officially. And on the other side of the political spectrum, the Working Families Party was out. I don't know how much money they spent, but they were out.
A lot less.
But they also claimed an impact yesterday. How much do you think either had?
Well, the only incumbent in the entire city to lose, besides Joe Hines, was also in Brooklyn. Along a city councilwoman going for her third term named Sarah Gonzalez. I don't think she's done much of anything in 8 years, from Red Hook. And she was supported by this REBNY, that's the name of the group.
Real Estate Board of New York.
Right, in their political action with independent mailings, flyers, and ads supporting her. And she lost to a challenger.
But REBNY says 80% of the candidates they backed won.
Right. The other thing is maybe these people would have won without them. Another race that they put a lot of money and effort into is way out at the end of Queens, right on the Nassau border, currently held by this departing fellow under indictment named Dan Halloran.
For corruption.
And which is the general story when they get arrested. There's a Paul Vallone, whose dad was Peter Vallone, the longtime speaker, and whose brother just lost for borough president. And he was backed very strongly by REBNY, and he's running a very close race, and they don't know who won yet. There's another fellow named Austin Shafran. So, you know, in two races that they put a lot of resources in, maybe they didn't win. In other races, maybe their candidate was going to. But I do know this, talking to some of the people involved, this is the first time out for them, and I think they have plenty of resources, and they're going to say, hey, we're allowed to do this. Next time, we're going to ramp it up, and instead of doing, 10 races, maybe we'll do 20. Maybe we'll do up to 51. As to the Working Families Party, they like to, and are legally allowed to get involved in Democratic primaries, generally finding the more liberal or progressive candidate and backing them. One of their big allies has always been Bill de Blasio. They did run a placeholder for mayor, and now, assuming de Blasio is the candidate, they'll support him in November.
And he'll have that line,
right,
since they're their own party,
right,
in addition to the
The
Democratic
placeholder
line.
will step off. And
Yes. So do you think, Kate, that de Blasio running as a movement candidate and a Tale of Two Cities candidate and, fight inequality candidate will have resonance in the Bronx in a way that will increase voter turnout?
That's an interesting question. I think that definitely his message does. I think in the areas that you see really low voter turnout, the message matters less in a sense. It's the idea that that the message doesn't necessarily apply to us, that the candidates aren't making an appearance there, and that really proves that that the audience is other than South Bronx residents. In particular, South Bronx is particularly low voter turnout. You see a different picture in Riverdale. You saw parts of Riverdale go for Quinn last night. Riverdale's part of the Bronx.
A much more middle class to upper middle class community.
Yes, exactly. Much whiter as well, and people do come out to vote in Riverdale. And you saw a lot of mayoral candidates coming up and campaigning in Riverdale, which was certainly different than other parts of the Bronx.
Quick comment, Michael, before we're out of time, on the Comptroller's race.
Yeah, this fellow named Elliot Spitzer.
I've heard of him.
He wrote a check out of his personal fortune for more than $10 million for a 9 or 10 week campaign, so that's $1 million a week. He didn't win. I think his father has about $600 million, so it's a small dent in the fortune.
On the other hand, is it a win for the establishment? Because everybody from the public sector unions to the Wall Street firms had reasons not to want the independence, as Elliot Spitzer would characterize it, of Spitzer, and they all backed Stringer, and they all turned out their voters. So is it a win for the establishment?
Well, I wouldn't say independence of Spitzer. I would say the crazed, maniacal, fits of conspiracy. I mean, the guy, he's terrible. He was a terrible governor, and he would be a terrible controller. And I think the city was spared a great problem. The future mayor is happy. I'm sure the governor's happy, and he would have been a crazy guy.
And when you're on the editorial board of a major New York newspaper, you don't have to pull those punches, and Michael Aronson didn't. Thank you for joining us. Kate, thank you very much. And up next, the next Brooklyn borough president, no doubt, Eric Adams. From NYPD captain to founder of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, to state senator, to apparently Brooklyn's next borough president, Eric Adams will be Brooklyn's first African-American borough president, and he joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you. I always like to say I have to finish the November election. We have a conservative candidate, so I'm still on the grind.
You were unopposed in the Democratic primary yesterday, and there's no Republican candidate, so your only obstacle to election is a conservative party candidate. Probably not a big obstacle in the borough of Kings. What did you think of the other primary results yesterday?
Oh, good. It was exciting. It was exciting to be out there and watch people go to the poll and have conversation. And it's just really energetic when you see the process taking place. And I think it's symbolic. At 9 o'clock, the president was talking about what was happening in Syria. At the same time, a free democratic society was showing how to do it. And it was important to watch.
The big news out of Brooklyn, the veteran DA Charles Hines, at least one of the big pieces of news out of Brooklyn. Hines lost to newcomer Kenneth Thompson, and by 10 points, 55% to 45%. You had endorsed Hines, right?
Yes.
So what do you think happened?
A combination. Hines has, I think it was 26 years, 24, 25 years. He was the district attorney. I think it was a combination that Ken Thompson had a wonderful story that resonated with a countless number of people. His mother was the first, one of the first women police officers growing up in public housing. When you saw the Bill de Blasio turnout in those communities, I think that Ken Thompson, his story just really resonated. It was almost the afro of the Bill de Blasio and the child, seeing Ken Thompson, it really just fit in together.
It's a heady time to be the president of Brooklyn, as you may soon be. Do you think we saw the emergence of a new Brooklyn in the political realm yesterday with Ken Thompson's win, with your likely win in November, even Bill de Blasio's apparent win, as you were just discussing?
Yeah, all over Brooklyn. You saw some earlier things where Congressman Hakeem Jeffries was elected. You have Jumaane Williams coming out of Brooklyn also. In the other seats, you're seeing new voices that are emerging. It's clear that not only has our skyline changed, but also the face and the shape of the leaders have changed as well. Letitia James is in the runoff for the public advocate race. There's something special happening in Brooklyn. Not only are trees growing in Brooklyn, but leaders are growing in Brooklyn. And now we have to make sure that our branches extend out to those communities who have been ignored.
You had endorsed Bill Thompson for mayor. Do you think Thompson should hang in and count every last paper ballot through next Monday? Apparently by law it would take until next Monday, and deprive de Blasio of that amount of time to run in the general. And if they do count the paper ballots, and let's say de Blasio winds up with 39.98%, just under the 40, should Thompson pursue a runoff?
I think we have to go to the process. I think Bill Thompson must make that decision. But at the same time, part of the process is counting the paper ballot. And if he decides he wants to take that route, then that's part of this process. This is a beautiful process. It's well thought out. And we can't just have expediency and convenience when it comes down to deciding who's going to run a city of this magnitude, of this size.
Do you have an agenda as the likely next Brooklyn Borough president?
Yes, invest in people. We have done a wonderful job throughout the borough, as I say so often, investing in the structures and those items that makes us a great borough. But I think it's time to invest in people, teach financial literacy, healthy eating, access to healthy food, bring commerce to the borough, look at manufacturing jobs again, deal with our serious healthcare crisis of everything from diabetes to the closing of hospitals, and really becoming a voice to advocate for those things that are important to Brooklynites.
You didn't mention public safety, which is of course such a big issue and relates to your background, and with the tragic shooting of one-year-old Antique just the other day, it's even more top of mind for a lot of people. Is that a function of the borough president's office on any level?
The beauty of the borough president's office in the city charter, it actually states basically do what you have to do to assist the borough. Connect with all your city agencies, and that includes the police department. And everyone knows my passion around public safety. Life is different when you wore a bulletproof vest for 22 years and stood on corners protecting children and families. So wherever I go, that same image of having that shield pinned to my chest is going to be brought with me. So public safety is important, being proactive, going back to areas like Brownsville, and actually learning and doing a proper analysis. Why do we have communities like that that are repeatedly enthralled in violence? And that's what I want to examine.
One of the areas of power that borough presidents have is over the community boards. Scott Stringer, now the nominee for Comptroller, as borough president of Manhattan, tried to reform the community board process. Is that something you have in mind for Brooklyn?
Yes, I think Scott did a great job. I also endorsed him as well. He's a great friend, and I think he's going to be a great controller. What I would like to do is ensure that the board is representative of the diversity. We need more young people on the board. We need students on the board. We need to look at some of the people who have been in place for years, such as board chairs and district managers, and to see do we need to have a turnover. So I think you need developers on the board. You need community activists on the board. We need a cross-section of individuals who can really speak to the need of the community and be active and come up with great ideas. And something else, we need to stop the brain drain. What I mean by that, certain boards have highly skilled, highly educated individuals in the community that sit on the boards. But you have other communities where you don't have that type of representation. So they don't know about how to go about presenting proposals and actually impacting some change.
Did you say appoint developers to the boards as well as activists?
A combination. I think everyone, if a developer lives in Community Board 3, there's no reason he can't or she can't sit on the board. If an affordable housing person lives in Community Board 2, there's no reason he shouldn't be on the board. Community boards are supposed to represent the concerns of the communities, and everybody should be part of that. It should not be one-sided.
Eric Adams, the nominee of the Democratic Party for borough president of Brooklyn. There's no Republican candidate. There is a conservative candidate. We'll talk to you in January, maybe before. And congratulations on entering this next phase.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian.
Up next, a deep demographic dive into New York's electorate. Well, to conclude our live New York primary roundup, let's take a more detailed and infographical look at the city's dynamic electorate. It's not your grandfather's New York any longer. In fact, it may not be the New York you think it is either. Helping us unpack the data are CUNY sociology professor and demographics expert Andrew Beveridge and CUNY Center for Urban Research Director John Mollenkopf. The center is behind the innovative NYC Election Atlas, which is helping journalists and citizens alike visualize where the votes are coming from and who is most likely to get them. We'll show you some cool visuals from that in a minute. But Andrew Beveridge, let me ask you first, are there, demographically speaking, two New Yorks, to use the de Blasio phrase, the sort of whiter Bloombergville and the, darker and poorer de Blasio Thompsontown?
I think there really are. I mean, if you take a look at the independents who obviously didn't vote, a whole chunk of them couldn't vote in the primary. The whole chunk of them are probably independents skewing Republican. Some of them will be independents skewing Democrat. But if you look at the thing, it is 6-1. Everybody says this. The registration ratio is 6-1. And so it's a huge difference. And if you take a look at the Republicans, and actually there are very few places in New York where the Republicans are in the majority. I think one of the few is Tot Hill and Staten Island, one of the few election districts where they're on top. By the way, Thompson carried that in the Democratic primary.
Among the registered Democrats.
Yeah, among the registered Democrats. Yeah, they were. Yeah, the Republicans at least didn't legally vote for Thompson. I think there are really big differences between sort of the average Democrat in New York and the average Republican. It's hard to get that because they don't ask that in the census. They don't ask that in the in other ways. But it's very true that there's a big difference.
Well, let's look at one of the New York City Election Atlas graphics. And speaking of two New Yorks, this is a graphic, and you can see it right there, of household income. So, John Mollenkopf, explain what we're looking at, and does this reflect the two New Yorks that Bill de Blasio speaks of?
Well, yes, it's one way to look at it. Certainly, Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, East Side, West Side, Village, downtown,
the darker the
and
green,
Brownstone, Brooklyn are the best off parts of the city. They're the oldest part, the most central part, the highest cost part.
The darker the green, the more the average income in the area, right?
Yes, and then there's also, you can see a pattern of some higher income households at the very periphery of the city, living at the beach, as it were. And in between are the lower income neighborhoods. You would see it, I think, even more clearly if you looked at a map of the racial and ethnic differences of the city, which overlap with the income distributions.
Let's look at it right now. Here's a map of race and ethnicity in New York City. I think we can bring that right up. So, John, we'll stay with you. What are we looking at here?
Well, the blue areas are basically white neighborhoods, and the reddish and pink areas are different kinds of black neighborhoods, Afro-Caribbean, African-American. And the others, the green are Asian, and the yellow and darker orange are the Latino neighborhoods. And New York City has a high degree of black-white racial segregation that's been very persistent. But the edges have been blurred a bit over the last 10 or 20 years by immigration. So white neighborhoods are less white, not because African Americans are moving in, but because Latinos and Asians are. And similarly, the black neighborhoods are more diverse than they used to be as well. So,
but the one thing that is true is the segregation. New York is going up in the segregation league tables. They used to be about sixth. I think they're now second in the whole country in terms of the most segregated
Which measures what precisely?
How distributed
the groups are.
So how separated. Segregation is really a measure of separation of the groups. So how segregated are whites from blacks compared to everywhere else in the United States. So New York is very, very highly segregated. And a lot of times people don't really want to accept the fact because New York is supposed to be very, very diverse.
It's up there with,
Number one is Milwaukee. Number two is New York.
Detroit.
In the last census.
Well, let's look at who votes. It looks like women are more likely to vote than men, 57% to...
Well, women make up much more of the registered voter list than men do.
I think it was about 57-42 yesterday, something like that.
And even if both groups turned out at the same rate, there would be more women than men voters.
And blacks were more likely to vote than whites among registered Democrats yesterday. 61% turnout, or I'm not sure what the 61 to 57% numbers refer to that I have here, but blacks at 61% of something, whites at only 57. I don't think either group turned out
Whites have gradually lost a bit of interest in the Democratic primary elections because it's less and less likely that a standard white a Jewish or an Italian candidate is going to win them.
But they're not becoming Republicans, are they? Don't we have an even greater ratio of registered Democrat to registered Republican than we did a generation ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that's happening is that the Democratic Party, and it's very difficult for any new group to make their way into the actual party structure. The person you had on last, is it Adams?
Yes.
I mean, that's a good example. He's going to take over for Marty Markowitz. Marty Markowitz fits more of the old model of, you know, of a Powell, a well-known Powell. And I think that that takes a very long time. And it's even harder for Latinos, particularly if they're not Puerto Rican, to move in, because not only do they have to work their way up in the party, but they have to become citizens first, or a large group of them.
We did elect our first Mexican-American city council person from Sunset Park in this election as well. And gradually, the new immigrant groups are working their way into the system.
To finish the thought about who votes, blacks more likely than whites in the Democratic primary. Renters are more likely to be voters than owners. That surprises me, but that's the stat I have. Those who own a business are more likely to vote than those who do not. Those working and those retired are more likely to vote than those currently unemployed but seeking work. There is higher status occupations, those with higher status occupations, and those with college degrees also more likely to vote than those not. All correct?
All correct.
And
Except, though, I do think that owners are more likely to vote than renters, but there are twice as many renters or more than owners, so that's not so material a difference.
I was wondering if the
that may just be the vote. That may be the vote. What you may have there is the proportion of the electorate of various, you know, various groups.
So let's put up another graphic from the Atlas, and this one actually shows what you call household form. Explain this.
Well, we normally think of Americans in the Ozzie and Harriet way, or at least people of our generation may think that way, of a two-parent family and 2 or 3 kids, and perhaps that's the way the larger part of America lives, but not in New York City.
What's all that red in Manhattan?
So the red are people actually living either by themselves or not in family households.
One person?
There are very many one-person households in Manhattan. It's really striking.
Or they may be groups of people living together, you know, like since the rents are so high in New York, you know, groups of younger people come in and, you know, take an apartment together.
The red spectrum there is actually people living alone.
Really? Yeah.
And I think people don't realize how many single-person households there are in Manhattan.
And the dark blue?
And the dark blue are the married couple families, the more traditional Ozzie and Harriet. And you can see they're in the outer boroughs, in the more suburban neighborhoods of New York City.
Do wealth and education predict turnout?
I think they predict turnout, but I think that we now know that wealth does not necessarily, and particularly education, does not necessarily predict whether they're going to be liberal or conservative. I mean, I think this really started, I mean, it became very noticeable when Hillary Clinton ran. She had very, very highly educated, high status people supporting her, much more so than supported, what was his name, Fazio or something like that? Lazio.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and Lazio. And so that, you know, so I think that flip has happened, and it's happened all over the Republican Party.
Thank you both very much for coming in tonight. And that's our program for this week. We debut a new program every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Next time, upward mobility. It depends on where you live. And tune into my radio program weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow morning, Republican mayoral nominee Joe Lhota. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.